Good morning, everybody. This is your favorite podcast team. At least we hope we're your favorite podcast team at this time. At least we hope that we've been giving you some sort of enjoyable pleasure on your morning commute or whatever it is that you're doing these mornings when you're either getting ready for work or headed to work or already at work and listening to us underneath your desk so that no one can see you in your little fortress of solitude. Today's episode of favorite quotes and leading into some of the things that have been most memorable for us. We are live from the Pantheon of Pedagogy, the mecca of methodology, your vacation from vacation with your Monday morning hitchhikers, where you can learn to seriously take teaching not so seriously. This is and we are Classroom Hacks. And by the way, I'm Eric Tan.
And I am Peter Canetis.
Pedro, how are you this morning?
So far, so good. It's Thursday. Oh, wait, did you say it's Monday?
It is Monday.
Okay,
so
ask me that question again.
Pedro just lifted the curtain for you now that you and Toto and Dorothy...
You can cut that part out so that we'll never, ever hear me say
The Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Cowardly Lion have now peeked behind the curtain. And Pedro has revealed that we don't actually film our episodes live, and most podcasts don't, that we actually record our podcast when our schedules align. And usually it's during the week, and we actually try to get one or two episodes recorded in the same day. And funny enough, when you'll hear the next opening for the next episode, which is fall schedule, it'll actually be the same day, and I will ask Pedro, how you doing,
Wait
as
a
if
minute,
we're new
day. We could just cut all this out, and you won't have to give away our secrets, our tricks.
We could, but there's still elements of the podcast that can remain a mystery. But there are certain things, as they say in magic, that are the prestige, and we'll give you a little taste for anyone who might be interested in developing a podcast of their own. And now that we went through all of that, we are looking at our favorite lines and quotes for today. Quotes are an interesting thing. From "Here's looking at you, kid," to "Why did it have to be snakes?" You want the truth? You can't handle the truth.
You complete me.
And there are just certain quotes that stick out to us as kids and as teenagers. We always tried to imitate and mimic our favorite lines from television, books, and movies.
There's no crying in baseball.
Exactly. But as adults, quotes and thoughts of wisdom tend to have a far more profound impact on how we sort of see the world. And on today's episode, we take a look at some of the more notable quotes from our lives and discuss how they've impacted us on both a personal and professional level. So Pedro, just before we get started, for you, what usually tends to make a quote memorable? Like, what is it that, when you think of some of the quotes that stuck out to you, why did they stick with you? What is it about them that give them that sort of special place in your heart and mind?
I have no idea. How about you?
Oh, that's good.
No,
great. Good thing we're doing a show here.
You know, that's a great question. I'm not so sure I can codify my thoughts here into a sentence or two about this, if I can exactly nail it down. But one thing I will say is, if it has some insight into my own life, there's a connection, a point of contact, or if there's an insight there about human nature or the human experience or life in general, life in particular. But it really comes down to, I think, the very first thing I said, the former thing in terms of the point of recognition. I read somewhere that Arthur Miller, the great playwright, would go to a play that he wrote, and he would sit in the audience on purpose, because a play for him was, he knew he was onto something when he would watch the audience and he would see in their faces that moment of recognition where the people in the audience are watching the play, and the looks on their faces was like, wait, that's me up there, that's my life. Yeah. And so I think of that in terms of what captures me in a quote or in a moment, or whether it's literature or film or TV or music, it's something along those lines. How about you?
Yeah, I as I was kind of saying earlier, I think when we're kids and we're teenagers, I feel like some of the more memorable lines, at least that I can think of, usually have been said with some sort of flair or panache, and then they usually come from an individual who's seen as like cool or important in some way, and then that's usually the subjective part of it. But as we kind of get older and we learn more about life, I think I realized that oftentimes the best quotes come from a place that usually carry a deeper meaning or more significant weight, and a lot of times memorable quotes are often direct reflection of the culture or some sort of social commentary speaking against some sort of absurdity of a particular thing. And it's usually, even when we first hear some of these things, like, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. That's one of those quotes that's iconic and memorable, not just because of who it was said or how it was said, but because in the culture at the time, hearing the first ever sort of cuss word on a big screen was sort of like ground shattering and groundbreaking. And now we have kind of really traversed a lot of that, and now we're saying things on television that and even in movies that we wouldn't have said before. And oddly enough, I think that's kind of why we don't have as many, should I say, like memorable quotes or like one-liners or punchlines for things. When I was actually looking at some of the top 100 quotes for movies on like AFI or Hollywood Ranker, that a lot of the movies that they cited from were like post or pre-2000. So obviously 1960s, 50s,
Really?
40s, 70s. Because I mean, think about it. From some of the movies you've seen recently, how many of those quotes really stick out to you? Like if you're thinking of the quotes that you know your lifetime, these are probably well before the year 2000.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Yeah, that's, in fact, I'm looking at my list here, and yeah, in fact, the one I have down here, or two of them, three from movies. One, two, they are before 2000. Oh my goodness.
And I think that just says something about our culture, because we do ingest things very quickly, but then we quickly sort of forget about them. Whereas before, when we heard these things or listened to these things, they just sort of resonated and sort of stuck with us a lot longer, because it took a while for the next great line or quote to sort of come through. Moving a little forward here, are there any particular quotes that stick out to you personally that you've enjoyed that don't necessarily have to deal with your professional life? Are there quotes that you just like that you've heard that you're like, yeah, that's either funny or I find that profound or wise? Are there anything that comes to mind?
Well, how much time do we have?
We got a good amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, we have so many on that list, right? So many quotes. Oh my goodness, so many to say. But you know, one that I'll just share that is more on the personal level, which of course will always affect our professional life as well, obviously. I mean, I would argue, is from the movie, again, 1999, so just right under that 2000 curtain there, from the movie Almost Famous, with Kate Hudson, the late, great Philip Seymour Hoffman, Billy Crudup, and I'm forgetting the kid's name. Well, now he's an adult, but he was a kid back then. I feel so embarrassed. Should I look it up? Nah.
Nah, we'll figure it out.
Okay.
And we'll come back to it. If any of you know the child actor we're referring to, please just...
It's Patrick is his first name. His last name starts with an F. I just can't remember it right
Patrick Flannery.
now. No. Anyway, and so there's a moment where Philip Seymour Hoffman says to the main character, who's the young man, who's the actor's name I'm forgetting. Philip Seymour Hoffman says, "The only true currency in this bankrupt world is what we share with one another when we're uncool."
Oh, that's great. That's a great line.
Actually, I might be butchering it a little bit now that we... Sorry. You're going to do a lot of editing in this episode.
Well, either way, I mean, Philip Seymour Hoffman, one of the great actors of our time, obviously no longer with us, but also just understood how to deliver certain things. And that was one of those lines that is just great on its own, but then obviously when delivered with certain power or influence can also have particular significance behind it. For me, I know that oddly enough, as I was growing up, I was a big fan of The Simpsons, and especially the early Simpsons of the 90s, the Conan O'Brien sort of written episodes. And as I was looking some of these quotes up, I had completely forgot about them, or they just sort of went under the radar for me. Obviously, they're the more famous lines that the characters sort of, that there were their catchphrases, but there was a lot of great lines in there that were very either nihilistic or existential. And one of the lines that Homer was saying when Lisa was trying to sort of plead to him about something and trying to get him to feel for a certain cause, he says to her, "Just because I don't care doesn't mean I don't understand." And I think that's one of those quotes that's even today obviously very relevant, because I think a lot of people, they get where other people are coming from, but they don't necessarily always care enough to empathize with certain people like that.
There's too much apathy going on.
Oh yeah, for sure. And then also from my all-time favorite book, which happens to be Joseph Heller's Catch-22, there's a character by the name of Yasirin, who's the main character in one of the scenes when him and his co-pilots are arguing with this old man from Italy. The co-pilot is very patriotic, and he's making this argument for patriotism, and he says to the old man, he says, anything worth living for is worth dying for. And the old man counters with, that is very true, but at the same time, anything worth dying for is certainly worth living for. Why it's my favorite book is because it's just this great sort of show of contrast and how it flips a lot of different social beliefs on their head. It obviously deals with a lot of the bureaucracy of the military and just the bureaucracy of life, and when we think we're getting somewhere, there's always someone else above us trying to tell us what to do. It just obviously certainly means that just because things are perceived one way doesn't necessarily mean they're always right. Any other lines that you have that are memorable for you, either from your childhood or from other areas that personally have affected you?
I never got to explain why the first line was beautiful. Sure. How dare you? Is because it's the openness and the vulnerability we share with someone. And when we have when we find people that we can share with and be vulnerable with, that's hard to find. I think those are oftentimes people who end up becoming real friends.
Yeah, and that's true. And oddly enough, we have a lot of people in our lives that we kind of have on like a surface level, and we have a lot of small talk. But it's not until you get to be vulnerable in your highest and weakest moments with someone that you really create a bond with them.
Yeah.
That's a good segue for our first commercial break, or actually we only usually have one commercial break here. And on the other side of that commercial break, when we come back, we will talk about some of the quotes that have affected us professionally and what are some of the things that sort of stuck out to us, and whether we reiterate those ideas in the classroom or we just sort of use them on a day-to-day basis to remind us to keep pushing forward or just to keep doing a good job. So we will be right back after these words from our sponsors.
Hello everyone, can I let you in on a little secret? Well, to be honest, it's kind of a big deal. Fall semester is right around the corner, and the College of DuPage will hold its annual Writing on the Edge conference on Saturday, October 20th. Now, remember that secret I just mentioned? Well, here it is. This year's conference is titled Composing Beyond Boundaries, and it's WOT's biggest conference to date. Hear, learn, and examine the most modern discussions about methodology, classroom innovation, and faculty life in and outside of the world of academia. WOT is always working to link disciplines, colleagues, students, and communities, and would like to invite all of its instructors who use writing and multimodal practices in their courses. Find out more about WOT from their website at writingontheedge.org. Classroom Hacks will be in attendance and will be headlining one of the sessions, so don't miss out. We hope to see you guys in October.
And we are back. So Pedro, for this half of the episode, are there any quotes that you've inherited or you've heard you use in a professional setting, or that you use in your class, or that you just use for yourself personally on a daily basis to get you through a day?
Well, let me start off with a rather obvious one, and in many ways will be considered cliche. It's on the cover, perhaps, of the vast majority of philosophy textbooks, and if it's not on the cover, it's mentioned in the first few pages. It's the Socrates quote, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Now, as we know, I'm a philosophy instructor, and so though it's been uttered zillions of times throughout human history, that quote, and associated with Socrates, it's still powerful because it's so easy to sleepwalk through life and to just go through the everyday and not pause and consider and contemplate, and just to think about everything from, hey, what's this all about, to am I making wise choices? Am I like the John Mayer song, "Why Georgia Why?" He says, am I living it right? Am I living it right? So that's one quote. Then I got two more quotes, but they're holding hands. So that's why I'll just say them back to back. One is by a famous Russian acting teacher, Konstantin Stanislavski. And if you ever
That's a mouthful.
I know, if you ever hear the term, oh, that actor is a method actor, that the term the method as far as acting comes from this teacher. And he has this great quote. He says, "I don't wait for moods. I work hard every day." And I'll couple that with a Thomas Edison quote where he says, "Opportunity is missed by most people because it's dressed in overalls and looks like work." And what's I really love about those, I find them pretty inspiring because it's so easy to be like, I don't feel like working hard today. I don't feel like doing X, Y, and Z today, even though I know I need to do X, Y, and Z. And so the issue for me is I don't want to rely on emotions. I want to make a commitment, stick to it. I'm not saying I do that perfectly. Far from it. That's the goal, because if we want to make a dent in this world before we leave or do anything great, it's going to take discipline and focus. I've come to realize that hard work produces inspiration rather than inspiration being the stimulus for hard work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Because sometimes like for example, here's a classic example. I don't feel like going to the gym, but I'll go because of the commitment. But then once you're there, oftentimes, maybe not every single time, the spark, while you're working out, the spark kicks in. You're like, yeah, I'm feeling great, or I'm glad I'm here. And even on those days where you don't feel great, when you're done, you're glad you did it because you know it was a good thing to do.
Yeah, and oddly enough, that reminds me of a question I sometimes pose in class, which I did get from the Big Bang Theory, which is more important, the idea or the execution. A lot of times it can be argued that without the ideas, we will have nothing. But at the same time, it takes people to execute on those ideas and create them. And usually, a lot of times, the idea of being more inspired comes from just doing something. And some of the things that we come across are discovered serendipitously because of the things that we just set out to do. That's a great line that Pedro brought up. And unfortunately, from my side, I don't necessarily have at least as time tested and proven and profound quotes as Pedro has brought up, and I definitely think all of the quotes he brought up are still valid and valuable today. The ones that have stuck out for me, at least for a professional level and a personal level to a certain degree. The first one, if you go back to our interview process episode, we talked about one of the tips that one of the administrators gave to me when he was sort of kind of prepping me and helping me for one of the interviews was, you can live by your sword, you can die by your sword, but you have to have a sword. That has sort of stuck with me essentially as in terms of life and an interview, that if you find something that you're very good at and you're passionate about, become as good as it as you can, bring it to the table, and at least try to say, this is how I can make what I do better than anybody else at, and bring it to your department, bring it to the job, bring it to whatever you need me to do with it. And as the old saying goes, in connection with that, do what you love and the money will come.
Yeah.
That's sort of attached to that. And then another quote that I received from one of the people that I used to work with. He was a mentor for me when I was in sales. He would always move around every few years because he would either get to the top of the game or he just kind of got stagnant. He told me that, I've been doing this a long time. In the beginning, sometimes you take the money and you run, but when you've been doing this as long as I have, you got to go with what makes you happy, even if it's less money. That stuck with me because, when you're young and you're full of vigor and you have these inspired ideas, sometimes you will go with a job or go with an opportunity that will yield more money because you have this sort of money-making mindset. But then as you get older and you realize what money can't buy you, what the certain materials can't get you, you tend to look at things a little differently and you go with what makes you happy. The last part actually came from my significant other when I've done my fair share of things that I think have annoyed her or frustrated her. And
We're talking your wife.
Yes,
okay.
and
I wasn't sure if you meant like a ex-girlfriend.
Yes,
or something.
yes. My current
wife.
My current house inhabitor that I live with. Yes, my loving wife. I think that anyone who's been married or been in a long-term relationship, at some point you will upset your partner. She told me one time after.
Do you upset her more, or does she upset you more?
I probably upset her more.
Okay.
That I was trying to give this whole backstory of why I did what I did. Here's my process, this and that. And she just said to me, "You screwed up, own it, and move on." Why that sticks out to me is because, as we talked about in the failure episode, I think a lot of times students and people get so wrapped up in trying to understand why they failed or why they messed up or why they screwed up. And in reality, we all are going to screw up and we're all going to mess up. As soon as we own that and we're accountable to ourselves for that, and we try to learn from it and become better from it and don't just dwell on it. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't reflect and dwell on things every now and then, but as soon as we can move on, we can sort of right the ship and try to learn from it. And that's, I think, in the most concise way I can take that, sort of apply it to myself. So before we leave you today, Pedro, are there any memorable or favorite quotes that you have? You can list as many as you like, as little as you like, but is just anything that you would like to sort of leave the audience with before we kind of bon voyage here?
Well, first, before I say that, I want to say I really liked the quotes that you said. Makes me think of things in my life where I've at times not owned up to something I've done wrong, and or when it's pointed out to me and I get defensive, and then later on I realize, no, they were right. And it's usually with my wife. She points out these things. She's so good at that.
Yeah, they usually have just a great knack or radar to let us know.
But in also, though, she's very free with the affirmations and words of encouragement as well. So, one quote, I mean, there's so many. That's why earlier in the podcast I said, how much time do we have? Because it's like, I'm sure people in the listening audience, they're thinking of millions of quotes that they've come across, or many quotes that made a difference in their lives. There's one from, I think, was it last year it came out, The Greatest Showman, the movie with Hugh Jackman. He plays P.T. Barnum. Yeah. And there's a line in there towards the end where Michelle Williams plays his wife. Her name is Charity Barnum. She says to Hugh Jackman, she says to P.T., her husband P.T., she says at one point, "You don't need everyone to love you, just a few good people." And I know this doesn't apply to everybody, but it's easy to struggle with wanting to be liked, whether it's as a teacher or as a coworker. And I know that I have friends who are like, "Hey, look, man, I don't care what other people think about me." And I think that we need a nice blend of that, along with the, I guess, a healthy, I'm not sure the best way to put this, a healthy view of, I do care what people think about me. So and I'm not a psychologist, I'm not going to attempt to, what's the perfect blend of that. But all that to say is, I realize in life, whether it's personally, professionally, I'm not going to please everybody. Yeah. No matter what I do. Even if I'm always nice and kind and I do the right thing and I'm always wise, and of course I'm not these things all the time, but even if I were, there's just going to be people who are doubters or doomsayers or people who just don't like me, like us. That's just the way life is. And so I have to realize that it's not about being liked necessarily, as to maybe just being an excellent human being. Yeah. And let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah, that's the kind of attached to the old dictum of those who know or believe in you, no explanation is needed, and those who doubt, no explanation will do.
It goes along those lines, yeah.
And for me, one quote that has definitely always stuck out to me is, I'm a big anime and cartoon fan, and one of my favorite shows of all time is Futurama. And there was an episode where Bender the robot gets sort of shot out into space, and he's floating through space, and he inevitably runs into this sort of galactic energy that he asks, are you God? And the energy's kind of like, well, I could be perceived that way by different people or different things, but I'm just kind of always been here. Bender, as he was kind of floating through space, got hit by a sort of meteor that contained like a small life form, and so these little organisms were growing on him, and he himself became sort of like a godlike creature, but he inevitably ended up destroying that civilization. And so he spoke to this giant galactic organism and said, I was God for a little bit, but I ended up screwing everything up. He said to the organism, "And what do you do when you need people to either believe in you or you need to get people to do things?" And this giant galactic energy force just sort of said to him, "When you do things right, people will think you didn't do anything at all." And why, when I first heard that, I didn't quite get it. And then as I kind of became a teacher and I've evolved in this position, and we've become more focused on like student-centered learning. When you can get your students to sort of be proactive and gain their own sense of agency, and this is even similar to when I was a tutor, I always told the people I was tutoring was, if I do my job correctly, you should never need me ever again. I think when it comes to students, if we do what we're supposed to do and they gain something that benefits them in a way that they can understand, that strengthens their approach and their process, they really shouldn't need us ever again. I mean, they can look to us and they can remember us, but they should gain those tools for themselves so that they can use it the best way for their lives. And it would seem like we really didn't do much, but maybe we did more than we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that dovetails nicely with what I said about being liked.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's easy to be, I want to be liked by my students, but that's not the most important thing.
Oh, yeah, agreed.
I had a teacher in grad school who said to our class, he goes, when I was a kid, my father said, and now mind you, this professor of mine, he had a good relationship with his dad. He said, when my professor, he was like 10 years old, and he did something, and his father got upset with him, and there was consequences. You know, he couldn't go outside and play or something. And he said, Greg, my job as your father is not to make you happy. My job is to help you become a certain kind of person.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the implication is there's, if you do, then happiness flows from that.
Sure.
Kind of an Aristotelian type.
Yeah. And that's a great place for us to sort of put a pin in this episode. As always, we thank you for joining us. And just a reminder, you can find your favorite episodes of Classroom Hacks all the time and always for free on SoundCloud. Please come visit us on our various social network pages, whether that's Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. We are growing each and every day. And big news and big announcement, Classroom Hacks will be at WOTE. We will be headlining one of these sessions. And get this, it is your opportunity to actually be a part of an actual Classroom Hacks podcast. And so
doesn't get much better than that.
It really doesn't.
You've arrived.
When you can say you can hear your voice and not see your face over the radio waves. And so until next time, thank you for joining us, Pedro. Arrivederci.